Hey, Aries Tech, it's Michaela Z at your Moon Mom, and I'm here with my husband, Corey.
Good to be here.
I thought there was a study that came out recently about the sperms, and I thought that it might be best to hear from someone who has sperm.
I do have those. Confirmed.
I am always like looking over and seeing his phone like on his lap and like moving it away. So I was like, you should read this study so that you have a little bit of insight as to like why I feel this way about having your phone around your stuff.
So I'm an environmental lab analyst. Really, I focus on organic chemistry, but in terms of my schooling, I'm an environmental science major. So really, I'm not a specialist in this field in any way, shape, or form, but through the schooling and through the work that I do, it does give me literacy to be able to go through these studies and kind of like divvy out, okay, what is it saying? What does it actually mean? What kind of methods are they using for the study? Are those sound? And should this conclusion be accepted, and is it reasonable?
Yeah, because when I'm going through a study, I have no scientific background and I'm just like, blah, blah, blah.
But honestly, that doesn't mean anything. Like anyone can go through a study, and I highly recommend people start gaining literacy and reading research studies because it's a really good thing. I feel like one of the reasons why we kind of just get led into our reasons for believing things are because we don't know how to read the underlying research of what brought those opinions about. So a lot of times, and me and Mickey have gone through and done this, we'll pull up a study, I'll read through the study, and whenever there is something like a word that we don't understand, we don't know the exact meaning, or we don't know the context in which it's being used, we will simply, you'll have two windows up. You'll have one with the study, you'll have another one with Google open. Literally just go over to your other tab, Google that word, and try to make it make sense to you within the context of that study. And that really does help out a ton. You can even take notes if you need to. I took notes for this as I was going through the study. So
Yeah, a lot of times I kind of start out by reading the abstract, which kind of gives you the idea of like, okay, this is what we are trying to.
it's a good place to begin.
Yeah, it's like this is what our study is about, and it kind of gives you like the layman's terms of like, because the in between stuff is what I really struggle with of like, okay, what is actually taking place? What are all these different
What methods are they using?
Yeah.
What kind of study is this in general? There's
Yeah,
so
like,
many different kinds.
What are these measurements and what do they mean? And then, so for me, what helps is like reading the abstract. Okay, this is like the general, aspect of this study, and then reading the discussion at the end, and like really getting an idea of like what is their conclusion, what did they figure out, and that way, I at least have an idea about what's going on. And then he usually breaks down, okay, this is actually what they did, and this is how they did it, and this is the metrics that they used. But a lot of times you find out that like when you really are able to read studies, and I feel like this is such an important thing to talk about, is a lot of times you'll find out that studies were done incorrectly, or they were done and they were like heavily, heavily manipulated to prove what they wanted to prove. Like they'll cut out data, and they'll even say it. If you read the research, it's like they'll even say it.
And it really depends on the stakes of the study. So, if you have, like, for example, I work for a city. So there's not that much money that's being put into the studies that we do. So it's a lot easier for us to report accurately and honestly the results. Whereas, say you have a pharmaceutical study that your entire funding is dependent upon you delivering good results, then you're going to make sure you get those results that are considered good for whoever the funder was.
Yeah, we were just talking about this in the interview I did with my mom too, where it's like, and most oftentimes, like they're not going to do the research if there's no money behind doing the research, because it costs a lot of money to do research. So telecommunication companies aren't going to be paying researchers to see if EMF is dangerous, because they don't want to know that it is.
Yeah, let me pay you to cut my own budget, essentially.
Yeah,
right?
let me pay you to make my product look bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so that's what he comes in handy. When you guys see me making these videos about like kind of what I'm digesting from all of these different studies, a lot of times I go to him for insight on what those studies are. So, new study came out recently. Mm-hmm. Well, how recent? I don't know how recent, but in the last couple of months?
Last few years, but it's been in the works for a while. So they started this study back in 2005, and it took so long just because they were trying to get as many participants as they could in this study. So yeah, they started gathering participants back then. The title of the study is Association Between Self-Reported Mobile Phone Use and Semen Quality in Young Men. So that's pretty descriptive. I mean, you can
How's your junk?
A lot of studies are like they try to use as many large terms as they can so that it sounds better whenever they're submitting them to be published. So one of the good things about this study is that they very much so did try to use layman's terms so that it was easily understandable to, the general person.
And just so you know, if you want to research this, like you want to read it, they have a blog and links to the research on ariestech.com. So you can go read it all about it. But tell us what it said.
So anytime you're reading a study, I think it's always really good to figure out the why. Why is this study being conducted? Why did they even decide to look into this? And what do they think the potential outcomes could be depending on their null hypothesis? So the reason why they decided to do this study, there's essentially three broad reasons. One is that nowadays, the current statistics for infertility are 1 in 6 couples are experiencing infertility issues. And that's basically just defined as couples who are have an inability to conceive after 1 year of having unprotected sex. So 1 in 6 really puts it into perspective. That is,
I feel like everybody has either gone through or knows someone who has gone through like IVF.
Yeah.
Like I know multiple people who either have or they are considering because of this problem.
Yeah. So the other reason is that there has been a noticeable decline in sperm count in young men over the last couple of decades. So there have been a couple of correlative factors that have been made, such as obesity, smoking, psychological stress, high alcohol consumption, but there hasn't been a whole lot of research to figure out why exactly those factors are correlated with lower sperm counts. And then the third thing is that there have been, preliminary studies done on rodents and in human sperm in vitro. So basically you can just kind of consider that like test tubes. So, they take the sperm and then they conduct the study specifically on the sperm. So the broad results of those studies is that EMF exposure affects germ cell cycles. It affects, it basically causes an increased rate of sperm cell death in those human sperm cells in vitro. And they have found that there have been histological or basically tissue changes in the testes whenever it's exposed to EMF exposure.
Tissue
changes within the testicles, yeah.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, like the biological makeup.
Okay, so that
is why this study was conducted.
Okay, so how did they figure out, like, what did they do? What was the actual study?
Okay, so for starters, there's a bunch, but there's two major types of studies. There's cross-sectional and there's longitudinal. So this was a cross-sectional study, and basically what that means is they got a very large group of individuals across many different populations, and they looked at them in one point in time, and that's really important because that's basically going to give you a good idea without affecting any variables of the input of these participants, what they're seeing. And basically the way that that these are a group of individuals that are going to, kind of be relatable to each other is that for this specific study, they conducted a lifestyle and a health assessment questionnaire. So they were able to figure out, okay, these are all participants that use their phone for prolonged periods of the day, or at least have a cell phone and are within this age group.
Okay, so they were all measured, like their hormones were measured?
No, so specifically they measured their sperm count.
Okay.
So they had
like, take this magazine into the corner. No.
Hey, I'm not going to speculate on how they got those.
Would you participate in this study?
Would I participate? Do they allow assistants to help with the collection of the sperm? If so, then absolutely.
Cut. Okay, so they tested. they took samples of their sperm, they did a health analysis,
Yep.
and then they just followed them for a prolonged period of time.
So the way that they used to correlate whether or not the EMF had an effect on their sperm count was whenever they filled out that lifestyle and health questionnaire, they asked them, how many times do you pick up your phone a day? How long are you exposed for it? And where do you keep your phone when you're not using it in terms to proximity to your genitals? So that's really how they gathered the participants, gathered the data, and then they used that questionnaire to correlate it to the sperm counts.
So they figured out, okay, so this is how they were able to correlate that EMF affects sperm count. It was okay, well, the people who in the assessment said that they hold their phone closer, in their pocket for longer periods of time, or they're using their phone for longer periods of time, we saw a larger decrease in their sperm.
And specifically, the way that they worded it was individuals who had a higher frequency of holding their mobile device, and they defined that as picking up their phone greater than 20 times per day, had which everybody does way more than that, had a significantly lower sperm count than the individuals who did not.
How do you feel about this?
It makes me want to stop putting my phone in my pocket, or it makes me want to get some type of device that can at least nullify those effects.
Oh wow! It looks like I have one for you.
Product placement right there.
It on there. It's so funny that we were just talking about this with my interview with my mom. It's my mom was into EMF way before I ever got into EMF. It was just something my mom did, and she
or it was even in the zeitgeist in the public consciousness.
It was just oh, mom, that's mom just doing her thing over there. And then as I started having kids and started experiencing, just seeing and noticing differences in my kids after they have used technology for longer periods of time, I feel like that really does make you more aware of what, this would have been really interesting to do, to participate yourself in something like this.
It gave you a good idea. And, I don't know if it's something where the results were disclosed to the participants or not. So, most of the time the participants don't have the insight that the researchers actually do. They're not seeing the actual numbers of it. But yeah, this study was a really good starting point, and most of the time that's what cross-sectional studies are used for as a starting point. You want to get as many people as you can, you want to get as much data as you can, and you want to try to make some correlative factor. Of course, you're not going to be able to find the causation. You're not going to be able to explicitly say, because they picked up their phone, that is the reason why their sperm count was lower. But it's a really good starting point, and that's how most studies begin. Then you would move on to a longitudinal study in which you have a set group of individuals and you study them over a period of time.
So it's one group of individuals, hey, you wear your phone in your pocket every day or something like that. And then it's you keep your phone on airplane mode when it's not in use.
Yep.
And you see the differences.
Yeah.
That would be the next step.
Yeah. And the reason why longitudinal studies are a lot more important and usually a secondary step to a cross-sectional study is because you can manipulate the variables in that. So you can have one group of people that they are not allowed to use their phones. You can have a second group of people that say you have to pick up your phone and use it for this amount of time in a day. And then you can see what are the difference in the results between those two groups.
I wonder how they're going to do. That's what's so difficult about doing studies when it comes to technology, because it's you can't really just take technology from people. It's such an integrated part of our lives. And also you can't just remove 5G towers if you live in a city. I mean, how would you even?
So, there would have to basically be
a Faraday.
There would have to be something in there. Well, yeah, you can either, I'm pretty sure they do paint, they do wall wrappings, all sorts of Faraday type stuff now. But it would have to, that's if you're inside a structure. People aren't just going to be sitting inside their house in a Faraday cage for the entire length of a study. What they're going to have to do is they're going to have to basically record the ambient EMF levels that are, just throughout your day you're going to be exposed to no matter what, just as a human living in proximity to a city.
Mm-hmm. And then go from there. Is there any other information that was important to take from this study?
the main takeaway is going to be like, yes, there was a correlation between using your phone more and your sperm quality or sperm counts. Um, the other thing is that this study had 2,886 participants in it,
Oh, dang.
which is a lot.
A lot.
It's a whole lot. Really, for any study, it's only going to be accepted if you have at least 30 or 31 people, because that's when you're going to be able to get a good value for a coefficient of were these results reliable.
I think that it'd be easy to say, oh, it's not EMFs, it's all of the poison in our food, or it's not EMF, it's smoking. But I think that when you really start understanding that we're electrical beings and we rely on electricity to communicate within our body, that these outside communications constantly bombarding us would take a lot of resources and energy from our body, which would then allow for those other things to contribute more to our health than they would otherwise. If we were just like fully healthy homeostasis beings, we would be able to mitigate the effects of those toxins that we're being surrounded by more so. So I think that's like the understanding here is like, we're not saying that EMF is causing, like, we're not saying that it is causing all of these things, but it is a fundamental aspect of our health.
It's a significant variable in why we are moving to that state as humans. And
where we are always chronically sick.
These hertz, these spectrums, they do affect us at a cellular level, and our cells do respond to them, actively respond to them. Whenever you're getting hit within a specific frequency of this spectrum, your cells become more porous. So usually they're blocking things from coming in unless they fit a specific space of that cell to notify that cell like, hey, this is allowed in. They're basically opening up a little bit more so that there's not as much of those barriers keeping these specific toxins from coming into the cells.
Yeah, I think that they talked about this on the Joe Rogan podcast too, about the blood-brain barrier and how we have like a certain protective layer around the brain. But Kennedy Jr. was saying this. Yeah, he was talking about how the EMFs are like basically putting holes in our blood-brain barrier and allowing those toxins into our
things
brain.
That normally wouldn't be able to pass through the blood-brain barrier.
Things that our body in a healthy state would be able to fight off
filter
or
out,
filter out.
essentially.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So the conclusion of this study basically says, what we talked about earlier, and then it ends with, and almost every study is going to end with this recommending more research into.
I've noticed that.
Yeah, you'll almost never find a study that is going to say 100% conclusive, because in science there is no 100%.
But people try to use that as an excuse for it not being legitimate. They're like, well, that study ended with. I'm like, but every study I've read. Has ended with, oh, hey, more research is needed.
Yeah, more research is always needed.
That's the whole point of research, is to open up, like...
The main thing is, most of the time when they say that, they're going to recommend in which area more research, which area they recommend more research being done in. And this specific study's case, it says more research should be done into the exposure aspect. So whether that means time that you're holding your phone, whether that means the specific frequency spectrum in which you are exposed to, or whether it means any other number of variables that they could define as falling into the exposure aspect of it.
Moral of the story, you guys. Protect your junk. Protect your man's junk.
Protect the boys.
Yeah. Hey, guys, if you want to learn more about this study or EMF in general, make sure to go to ariestech.com.